Good evening, all. Big crowd tonight. Welcome to the June 12th, 2023 edition of the Town of Garner Planning Commission. We're happy to be here tonight. With that, we'll move on to roll call.
Good evening, Commissioners. I will call the roll. Gina Avent.
Here.
John Blasco.
Here.
Ralph Carson.
Here.
Philip Jefferson.
Here.
Thong Ma.
Here.
Sherry Phillips.
Here.
And Michael Voyland.
Here.
That's all members present.
Thank you. Mr. Voyland has offered to do a reflection this evening.
I have. This evening, I'd like to bring up a couple of insights about making plans that were offered by two famous people in American history. The first is from former President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. In addressing Congress in 1962, he said, "The time to repair the roof is when the sun is shining." The second piece of advice was stated by that great American philosopher and former New York Yankee catcher Yogi Berra, who said, "If you don't know where you are going, you'll end up someplace else." Both these folks are really just talking about the importance of making good plans. Homeowners are wise to have new roofing installed when the weather is clear, and the roofers have time to do the work unrushed and with care. And when traveling any long distance into unfamiliar territory, drivers who don't have a solid travel plan with a good map to guide them could find themselves off course and lost, or, as Yogi would say, someplace else. So as advisors to our town planners, we should always keep in mind how the measured and thoughtful input we offer to them now can help the town develop wisely in the future, and how having good long-range plans, that is, good maps to follow, will help get the town where it needs to go.
All right, thank you very much. Well said. Much appreciated. Moving on, we will have the adoption of the agenda. Is there a motion?
I'll move.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda.
Okay, and I will call the roll. The vote. Gina Avent.
Yay.
John Blasco.
Aye.
Ralph Carson. Philip Jefferson.
Aye.
Thong Ma.
Aye.
Sherry Phillips. And Michael Voyland. That's unanimous.
All right, thank you. Moving on to the minutes from our May 8th meeting. Any comments or a motion?
I'll move that the minutes be adopted as written.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second to adopt the minutes.
Okay, I will call the vote. Gina Avent.
Aye.
John Blasco.
Aye.
Ralph Carson. Philip Jefferson.
Aye.
Thong Ma.
Aye.
Sherry Phillips.
Aye.
And Michael Voyland. And that's unanimous.
All right, thank you very much. I do appreciate, I noticed in the minutes, just some of that you were able to capture some of the things that we sort of recommended or suggested and that weren't necessarily part of the motion, but that were just emphasized. Thank you. Before we dive into the Garner Forward Comprehensive Plan, Mr. Triesenberg had a quick little thing.
Yes. Since this is the end of the year and our boards and commissions have folks who are rotating off, we're not yet certain on whether or not the volunteer dinner that used to be had every year, if that's going to be returning as of yet. They're still getting some advice on that, but we did at the very least want to put together a little certificate of recognition. And so Vang, you're the one that is rotating off this time around. So we do just have a certificate of appreciation for you for your years of service, which has been, I believe, 6 years, 3 2-year terms. Your outstanding commitment to the community and many contributions both to this commission and our department. So we just wanted to give this to you on behalf of the town.
Speech.
Thank you, Vang. We much appreciate your service, and I know the town does as well. And I've appreciated having you as my vice chair for a year. So, thanks for all your effort up here.
Yes, thank you. It's been my pleasure serving as a PC member. So I do thank you for that. That's it.
All right. With that, we will move on to our only agenda item, Garner Forward Comprehensive Plan update.
Alrighty. So we don't have a formal presentation for you this evening, but what we thought we would do is I would invite Matt up first to talk about some of the comments that were received during the public hearing process, because he will be working on some revised language and other things in response to that. Once he has those items drafted, we will get those to you to review in advance of your July meeting. And then after we're done kind of going over those public hearing comments, staff has been collecting some small amendments. We've been through the document a few times, but this last time we wanted to really focus on the maps and the matrices and really kind of the functionality of the document. And so we do have a list of proposed modifications to the map, and we'll just step through those one by one. And you all can see what we're thinking about and why we were thinking about those potential changes, and then give us your feedback and a general thumbs up, thumbs down kind of thing. And then we'll wrap it all though into one complete package for you at your July meeting, so that you can make a recommendation hopefully on the document itself with a list of amendments. We won't actually do all of the document changing until afterwards, but we'll at least have a list of those for you to go with that. Does that sound okay?
That's great.
Okay. All right, Matt.
All right, good evening. Thank you for having me back.
Absolutely.
For the record, my name is Matt Noonkester. I'm the owner and founding principal of City Explained Incorporated. We are hired as a consultant and extension of town staff to update the Garner Forward Comprehensive Plan. As Jeff had mentioned, this is less about me talking at you and more about us having a conversation together at this point in time. I wanted to bring you up to speed on what happened at the public hearing that we had with Town Council. And then as mentioned, Jeff has the staff memo that was circulated, and we'll go through that today as well. And then there's a third bucket of things coming on that I just call the Scribner errors, like a comma, a misspelling. Something should have been American, I had America, that kind of stuff. It's just the Scribner error type things that we're correcting as well. So I thought what I would do is just quickly give you some of the overarching comments that we had from the public hearing and just throw those away. My daughter wants to talk to me, but I won't do it now. So I'll just give you a couple of highlights, and then maybe let me run through them just to kind of set the table, and then we can go back and go through them in more detail and get some comments, or if you have any thoughts or reactions to them. So in no particular order, just a few things that we had heard during the public hearing process. One was recognition that there had been a citizen survey done for the former Garner Forward Comprehensive Plan. And whether and how you might incorporate that into current or future planning processes. We're still evaluating that survey, the instrument, how it can be used and the like, and whether it's best to just have a survey for a back check, or whether to fold it into the monitoring process. And so in some communities we work in, you might do a community survey a couple of months before you do your annual update of how things are going on implementation to council. And so you'd have that information available as part of that process and the update as you go through. So we're still looking at that and how to best incorporate that into our process. There was also recognition, planning is very dynamic, and in real time things are always changing. If you remember, within our general framework map, we have a recommendation to expand your extraterritorial jurisdiction. You also may be aware that at the state legislature right now, there are bills pending that would eliminate the ability to do that. And so we're going to figure out, or maybe monitor to the best of our abilities, where the compass is pointing at the time of our plan adoption. But we may also lean on just leaving it in our document, because if it's illegal by state law, so be it. But if law ever changes again, you have what you want as your stated intentions in there. But we are monitoring what's happening at the state level on extraterritorial jurisdiction. We also talked about a comparison back to the draft, and there was a pretty thorough analysis about what topics were covered in the previous document versus what's in here now. There was a request to have some reflection on the topic of preserving existing neighborhoods and home affordability. So we're going to look at those two topics again and see whether an extra recommendation or two may be warranted to build a bridge back to the previous document. There has been some verbiage already added, like in the opening to the theme and stuff like that. It's there, but it's not one of those green text paragraphs that I'm going to go over with in a minute. So we'll look at that and how we present it. There was also a discussion about looking at the guiding principles and maybe grouping those in a way that they're more intuitive in terms of buckets. And so some of the buckets that were discussed were, one being fiscal sustainability and stewardship, number two being quality of life, and number three being smart development and growth, and whether the guiding principles could fit nicely in there, and if there was any recommendations the consultant might have for how to quantify those or measure whether you're making good faith efforts towards those. So we're going to look at that as well. And then the whole definition of mixed use and the most appropriate place to put in guidelines and rules and requirements, whether it's in the comprehensive plan, the zoning ordinance, you know, there's a handoff that has to occur there. And so we want to make sure we give just enough guidance in the comprehensive plan about the intentions of mixed use, but not take it too far that we put you in a bad spot on your zoning, remembering that zoning is more detailed in its drill down of requirements, but also we can have multiple zoning districts for a land use category. So we're looking at that and how that bridge would occur. And then we talked a little bit about the differences between horizontal mixed use and vertical mixed use. And we talked a lot at the public hearing about how it's sometimes hard to make general statements because it's all about the size of the parcel and the shape of the parcel. I made the quote during the presentation that parcel lines actually screw up all of the recommendations sometimes in a plan because you have to worry about land ownership and phasing and connecting and all that kind of good stuff. And so, again, a lot of that gets taken care of in zoning, though, in terms of stub-out street requirements and all that kind of good stuff. But how do we ensure that when you have a mixed-use center, somebody actually builds the center and they don't all come in and build the neighborhoods first, because that's the hot thing in the market right now, and then the center's never built. So that's the kind of stuff we talked about a little bit there. There was a comment that the concept of more housing options, I'm trying to pick my words because I haven't come to a conclusion yet, but basically the missing middle housing moniker is kind of being overplayed and is sort of the bumper sticker of planning right now. And so is there a way that we can just say what it is without having to put a spin on it? So we're going to look at that and how we might use a term for that. And then the last thing is maybe just a direction so that everybody is clear and on the same page, from you at the dais to staff to the public, to understand that the green text throughout the document would actually be the criteria that an application is measured against. And the paragraphs underneath the green text expand on that and give details and criteria and thresholds, but it's actually the green text that you might cite in a staff report. So those were all of the comments that we have received through the public hearing process. And as Jeff had mentioned, we're kind of just creating like a batch of edits, and we'll do them all at one time. But because those public hearing comments came after I met with you all, we wanted to bring them back to you. So that's kind of bucket one. So I'll stop at bucket one, but then we do have the staff report for bucket two, just so you know that's coming up. So I give it back to the chair.
All right, thank you. I have a couple questions, but before I dive into mine, any questions from commission members? I was kind of curious about the ETJ expansion, and I don't anticipate or expect you to jump into the minds of our legislature, but just if there's any background or perspective you could provide on why they may be considering not allowing municipalities to expand.
Yeah. So, I mean, I do not have like a legislative update, and I don't come to you as anybody who is an authority on that, and I appreciate somebody is coming up who is an authority on that. My only editorial comment I'll make is you're getting your thoughts together is that to me, as a planner and a planner who works nationally, it's just one more example in a Dillon rule state of how the pendulum swings, and it swings to the extreme every time. So it's like, oh, somebody had a problem with ETJ, so let's just outlaw it for the whole state. Or let's just, so that's really, I think, what's kind of happening, is that these things are extremes and reactions to single events that the whole state will have to live by. But please correct me.
Thank you. Terry Jones, town attorney. Anticipated that this has, been in the news recently, and you might have some questions about it. So I have been monitoring this bill. I listened to the Senate hearing in committee last week, as well as the floor vote, and this is what I can glean from it. First off, much of the bill that would eliminate the ability to have an ETJ as it stands now would not apply to Garner because it's located in a county with a population more than 50,000 in population. So we would continue to be able to exercise or regulate the ETJ, but we would be frozen in place. So the ETJ as it existed on June 1st, 2023, there would not be an expansion. Because we were going through this process and anticipated that it may be natural following the clue plan, should that be adopted, to look at expanding the ETJ, we are proposing to ask for an exemption, either that similar exemption for municipalities and counties with a population greater than 50,000, or just for the exemption to apply to Wake County. I have surveyed the other municipalities within Wake County, and right now the only response I've received is that Rollsville was also planning an ETJ expansion probably in 2024. However, the rest of the municipalities have responded that they don't oppose, and in most cases would support the ability to have that option in the future. What the sponsor of the bill, Senator Lee, seemed to say is that he felt that when involuntary annexations were abolished a few years ago, which they weren't actually abolished, they just were made to be very prohibitively expensive for the jurisdiction when you have to pay for all the water and sewer infrastructure, that he felt that there's no need for an ETJ anymore. And he did get pushback from the senator from Asheville who said, well, the General Assembly eliminated Asheville's ETJ several years ago. Can we have it back because we're in Buncombe County and we're over 50,000? And he said, no, that's not the intent of the bill. And again, the Mecklenburg County, one of the senators from there said, well, we may want to expand. And again, said that the intent was to freeze it in place. Did not illuminate why this was, other than they feel that voluntary annexation would solve the issue. There also, the bill drafter indicated that perhaps counties, municipalities could do interlocal agreements. I personally don't think an interlocal agreement can apply zoning regulation, building code regulations, minimum housing regulations to property. Although they, and then there was some thought about maybe create some kind of joint commission to deal with these areas. But my understanding is that Wake County doesn't want to take back the ETJs, and that they're happy with how it's been going, where each municipality can expand their ETJ at the appropriate time. The other thing I've heard is that they don't feel that there's representation. You can't vote for the elected officials in the ETJ, but as Garner's demonstrated, the Planning Commission and the Board of Adjustment do have members that represent, that are appointed by the Board of County Commissioners that do represent the interest of property owners that are in the county and not residents yet of the town, that are in the ETJ as it exists. And so if we expanded, we would expand the potential membership of those members. So, but right now it's passed the Senate. It does not have a hearing date in the House yet, but it would have to go through the process in the House before it would become law. So if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer with what I know.
No, thank you. That was very, very thorough, and I appreciate it. So, Any other questions on the ETJ? Yeah, so I think it makes sense to somehow write in there that if still allowable, this is our recommendation, but.
It may be just as simple as having the phrase, subject to the requirements of state law or something like that, just to have it clear.
The other question or maybe comment, I don't know, just the discussion of affordability and the different housing option types and the missing middle conversation. I do remember from when we went through the original, or not the original, but the last comprehensive plan, the Garner Forward, that was a big topic. I think that was somewhat tied to Garner's character, which I guess is what we're trying to figure out now. Yeah, I don't know how you do that, because a lot of it is so market driven. How do you delegate, land use as affordable housing without the town owning the property and then developing it how they see fit? But any insight from your years of doing this work?
It's a tough nut to crack, for sure. Couple of things. I need to go, obviously I haven't memorized every word in the document, but I do remember a deliberate intent to make sure that in the missing middle section, we didn't say that missing middle meant it would be affordable. It just meant it was a different housing option. So I'll make sure that that's clear in there, because they're not tied together. They're just spoken together a lot. And most of the places I've seen, again, in the state and nationally, that do effective jobs at affordable housing are doing it through either incentives or bond programs where they're paying into a project or those kind of things. It is hard to just regulate it. I've made several presentations where if I have a townhome in Florida and a townhome here, from an urban form standpoint, they're the same, but they might be, 4 times difference in price, one versus the other. And it's hard to control that without putting in another policy. It's not a land use policy. It would have to be another policy of the town.
Right. Yeah, one of the other things that kind of seems to be that we're kind of fighting the two, is there's obviously that big push for higher design, better design, which doesn't have to mean inexpensive, but it often does. No, I appreciate trying to wrap that in. I just curious to see it. That's just like I said, tough nut to crack and a challenge. Easier said than done. So, but those were the only questions, comments I had for the moment. So,
Bucket 2, or do you want to?
I'm going to ask you one more question.
Okay, please.
To get input from these folks on is the whole mixed use concept and how that works, and how do they look at cases, and how do you all see that working?
Yeah. So again, the concept of mixed use, you would have a tool bag or toolbox of things that you would be able to grab out of the document to evaluate a project or a proposal. So the first thing is in the general framework map, we will have nodes that are designated, and that's going to be part of our discussion in bucket number 2. But if you're within those nodes and general proximity of it, there are initiatives that are written that talk about having a discernible center. How do you have your density allocated? But it's the most prescriptive part of the plan on mixed use is in that section. The second thing then is we have the character typology map. So that's if you're looking at the world flat and we have colors for what are the intended uses, we have a mixed use category. And that talks about having 2 or more mixed uses and how does open space work into it and that kind of thing. Then the third map we have is a development and intensity map. And that talks about kind of what comes off of the ground, building height, parking, things like block structure, those kind of things are in there. And so that would be your third kind of bite at the apple in terms of being able to influence mixed use. And then all of that should be expanded upon in your zoning or your UDO. I'll just tell you from other experience where I can argue both sides. I'm being very honest with you all. I'll have some communities that'll put in percentages and they'll say like 25%, 50% of your project has to be non-residential. That works when the parcel's large. It doesn't work when the parcel's small. It also doesn't work if you have multiple parcels, and the idea, the vision is to have the center in the most appropriate place, but that parcel hasn't come in yet. And so you've built kind of a center ahead of its time that wouldn't be in the place I would put it if I could have the whole project to work with at one time. So that's, some places have avoided the percentages at that point. The other thing is that, you know, the comprehensive plan is meant to be inspirational, set a framework and outcomes. Some of those numbers may be better in the zoning ordinance. Just like, remember, we moved densities and things into zoning, not keeping them in our plan. So things like land use mix and stuff we think would be very appropriate to be in your UDO as well versus in the plan. And, you know, we're not running away from it. We'd be happy to provide recommendations of what you would do in your UDO to not have a gap. But it's our recommendation that those kind of things go into zoning.
Yeah, that's a tricky one that I've thought about a lot, because I think I've seen, you know, projects come through that were, you know, you're like, wow, if this parcel were combined with one next to it, this could be a so much better project. But we're stuck with this little, you know, small project, and then what's going to happen next door? I mean, you know, it's the thought about, you know, if the, you know, developer A comes in and, you know, with a small project, there's something in the back of my head that says he's going to come back in 3 months with the next door project and get away with a lot less because he's playing the game.
Yeah.
And that's not always the case. I don't want to throw shade on all the developers, but just, and I don't know that as planning commission, we have a lot of authority or a lot of power to sway that into, you know, try to encourage assemblage of properties that we know that maybe our target area. Maybe is that something that falls more directly on the planning staff as they see projects come in and, you know, in an area, not every one, but in areas that are identified as these nodes and these mixed use centers, is it incumbent on them to try to push people in certain directions? Because I don't know that we have that authority other than to say, well, we wish you did this, but what you're doing meets the intent of the UDO and the comp plan. And
So just ideas that I would kick around as we look into the amendments we're making is, one is when we go to talk about bucket 2 here, maybe we actually put the center where we would like the non-residential center to be. You know, instead of just like an intersection, we pick a parcel we feel is large enough to do that, and then you can enforce that, well, that dot was put there because that's where the non-residential center should be. That's one idea that we can do. The other thing might be to incorporate pedestrian sheds, which are basically quarter-mile walking distances, and there's already kind of detail and direction in the plan now to say that within a quarter mile of all homes, you should have some type of destination, whether it's a park or something non-residential or the like. But maybe we could give some more guidance there. But ultimately, I think as you'd mentioned, we just need to give enough that gives staff the authority, power, and desire during the application process, because these things are so different, whether it's a long, narrow parcel or whether it's a flag parcel or whether, that, you know, I don't want to give you unintended consequences by boxing in staff at that point as well. So it is a tightrope to walk for sure.
that's what worries me a little bit about the idea of identifying where that center needs, because then do you put yourself at risk of developing a donut?
Yep.
Where everyone comes in and develops the residential around what should be the center, but then no one ever develops the center because by itself maybe it isn't, you know, a money maker, or the market's not there, whatever. I like the idea of the walking, you know, the walkability shed, pedestrian shed. I mean, that's intriguing to me.
That then requires that our pedestrian plan is better in place, right? That we have sidewalks that may not connect, you know, where we have those developments where they are providing a sidewalk in their development, but then there's no sidewalk when it goes beyond that. So we have to make sure that that also helps reduce kind of, you know, traffic, which everyone keeps talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you can get something that's within a certain distance, you don't have to travel all the way across town and flood the roadways. That's very true.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments or thoughts?
So we do have a second bucket.
I'll come up there and
Okay.
walk them through. When you talk about, some of the ways that you all can have some influence and some sway, I think one of the things, and I know Mr. Bell's out in the audience, and I don't mean to pick on the project that he's probably most interested in, but I'll just use it as an example, if I may. Out there at, with Burnett Farms, when that project came through, that is a piece of a much larger land assemblage. And one of the things that I think I would encourage you all as the commission, just like we did at the public hearing, is to go on record, with statements about, okay, we're going to recognize that this is, a residential component of a larger mixed use area. And you can even go so far as to say, we think this acreage here in the future should be that. And so, I think that's one of the ways that we can use this plan to try to give you some reinforcement into making those kind of recommendations. Because there's always going to be situations where it doesn't come in as one project. It just won't. But the other thing that I would say that, as we look through this, and Brian helped me a lot with this before he left, we looked at the maps, we looked at the matrices, and really tried to see how it would work and how we could give, with so much discussion and interest in trying to, bring non-residential components to play in as many projects as we can. How can we set ourselves up, hopefully, for some success with that, being from a little corner store or a little daycare, in a neighborhood, all the way up to larger things. So I'm going to step you through some of these proposed amendments, and just kind of keep that in mind, that these are ways that we're trying to make sure that we've got good spatial coverage from the node perspective, but then also suggesting some slight modifications in the matrices to support things that might not be suitable in a activity center. And a good example of that, I think, is at Woodland Road and Timber Drive. You have that one corner that's non-residential. It's not a lot. It's kind of an office, some commercial mix. I don't know that it's really worthy of being called a activity center, but it is supporting the neighborhoods around there with some various office and retail needs. So without more ado, I'll get up and walk you through these. So the first few sets of them are largely focused on this framework map. As Matt was saying, this is really kind of the base from which we build everything else. So again, we've looked at this, tried to give particular attention to where there maybe were some gaps, or where we've seen interest and where we know that there are parcels that potentially can help with things. So the first recommendation would be, and I don't think this is gonna work. Nope, because I'm not in PowerPoint. Is there a way to activate the? No, okay. Yeah. I'm not aware of a way. Okay. So I can't make the color special, but can you see the arrow? Okay, good. So one would be to add a neighborhood activity center here in the vicinity of Simpkins Road and 401. You've got the school there and some other large parcels. The Speedway isn't far away there. So again, a neighborhood activity center would be something a little bit smaller scale. We're not talking something, huge. But given right now, we only have one dot in the draft, and that's down at Manor Ridge Lane or Manor Ridge Drive. The opportunities there, we think, are a little more limited. So between putting a neighborhood activity center up here at Simpkins and 401, and then moving the one here slightly further south into this area, you mentioned the idea of kind of creating residential all around, but there's this nice parcel here in the middle that's in the light blue of that 401 assemblage development. It could also go on the other side. We had the Bennett assemblage project here, and we're working with developers now on a mixed commercial component just to the south. So again, I think by establishing two neighborhood activity centers here instead of one at Manor Ridge, which is more of it's a DOT maintained road and large lot subdivisions, that would be our first two recommendations. Does that sound positive, negative?
Yeah, actually makes sense based on where Manor Ridge is and what's adjacent to it. And at Simpkins Road, there is a lot of potential for some activity that would engage.
Isn't the old Pelicans right there at that intersection too? Do you have any idea of what's going to happen with that property?
So the property's for sale. We actually had a project in review. We're unsure if it's going to continue. But, just the fact that there has been historically, some kind of activity at that location, I think it would make sense too to continue to ask for something that's reflective of an activity center.
Yeah, I think for me at that location, an activity center in that general area makes sense. I mean, was it just south of there last month? We, recommended that project that had the little brewery, and that was a little further south, but,
Yes.
but I think the key at that area is that any sort of commercial activity, any development really needs to respect, the Colonial Heights neighborhood and what's there. And I think from what I've heard about the project that was in review, there may have been some concern about that respect of the two, the play of the two different developments. But no, I mean, I think like you said, there's already was commercial there for quite a long time. I mean, so I think it makes some amount of sense. It's like, again, just got to think about how we protect the existing housing stock and not overwhelm it, but yet support it. And the one further south, that's the RST 401, or that. There's a lot of development in that assemblage, and commercial would make a lot of sense. I feel like we've discussed that in previous, whether it was that one or one across the street, how it felt like there needed to be something commercial. I feel like that's come up in conversation in the past year or two or
It
three.
has. Yeah. Any other thoughts or comments on those two? All righty, we'll go to number 3. Again, proposed neighborhood activity center at the intersection of, or near the intersection of Woodland and Old Stage. There's not, again, the closest thing is Woodland and Timber Drive, which again is not really big enough to be much of an activity center. So again, this area seems to be lacking in something to, pull the neighborhood folks kind of together. There's not a real good assemblage of parcels right at the intersection, but there are some opportunities just south and just north. So I would propose actually just kind of putting it on the intersection in that case, and then we can kind of see where it might go to from there. And then in conjunction with that, I would then go over to the development change and intensity map, which just shows the level 2 area to strengthen, and not that we want to encourage Again, huge amounts of change to respect those neighborhoods in that area. We would recommend taking some of those parcels up to a level 3, just to support that. Would be, because it would be something different. You would be introducing that non-residential node within there. And then also on page 227, which is our priority infrastructure investment areas, potentially then also flipping those same larger parcels in that area from tier 3 residential to tier 3 non-residential. So you can kind of see how these maps work together. We need them all to kind of help build and reinforce the idea of where we want to see these mixed-use centers. If we have them coded too low, that, oh yeah, these are fine, we just need to make little tweaks to strengthen them, or we don't really need to prioritize, investment, then we're kind of missing the boat, we feel. Thoughts on that one? Because that brings in, like I say, that one brings in more maps.
The new development that is on Old Stage, just south of Woodland, what is that, about a quarter mile away?
Mm-hmm.
Where all the trees, where I won't say it, where all the trees are gone, I will say it. Would that help?
But we do have the nature preserve right next door.
We do. No, let's keep it that way. Would that help to service that? I mean, would that help the service to keep some of the traffic perhaps consolidated to a kind of to a neighborhood area activity center that would actually help provide something instead of having to go all the way out to 401 again or back onto?
Particularly if it were to develop on the south side of Woodland, I think for sure it would.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about a neighborhood center or a community center at that intersection. I'm looking at the map on my phone. I'm not looking at sports scores or anything.
And not community, just neighborhood.
Yeah, just that. I mean, a little bit to the south, you've got that little development that's got some flex type buildings, I think, and
yeah, that's a
church.
That's a long-standing kind of anomaly, I would say, in that area, being that it's very much it's almost a heavy industrial kind of setting right here.
Yeah, I struggle a little bit with just the rural character of Woodland and Old Stage and trying to put commercial there. I mean, not sure if I can picture that myself, but I'm not opposed. I'm not totally against it. But
the other thing that I would say that we kind of thought about too is that you do have the old site that was zoned for the Food Line years and years ago, which is right here. I don't think that, as staff, we don't really feel like that probably makes much sense in the future. And actually, I think the county now has either taken ownership or is considering ownership of it. It's right here at the end of Vandora Springs, where Vandora Springs comes into Old Stage.
Gotcha.
So again, we kind of wanted to try to recognize that there has been in the past some interest in something there. And again, I think the important thing to keep in mind is, everything, again, needs to be context sensitive. But it does feel like there's a gap there for something.
Yeah. I kind of, Mr. Blasco, I see exactly what he's also thinking. I think if it's something that can help service the neighborhood but not take away from the rural character or, the existing stock of residential that does exist. I mean, there is that one little kind of section that is not. You're right.
Yes. So we would still have it coded as neighborhood. And we'll get to one of the things too about some tweaks to the residential neighborhood that would kind of help also kind of inform the scale and what those things might look like. But then again, you know, we're not saying transform to level 4, just to a level 3, which is still 1 to 3 story stuff. It's not gigantic.
I think I might feel more comfortable with it if it were down towards the Vandora Springs connection, partly because at Woodland and Old Stage, there's already a lot of existing residential. I think all 4 corners of that intersection, or all 3 corners, have residential. But you get down to Vandora Springs, there's a lot more vacant land, so maybe it tends to be more appropriate. You're not overwhelming an existing housing stock, and the housing stock that's there at Vandora Pines is already 2-story, more modern, or more. It's not the older, ranch style on acre and a half lots. So maybe the context is a little bit better, a little bit more appropriate at that point. Maybe it wouldn't be as, if it goes into where there's all this vacant land, it's not as jarring to the existing character, where at the Woodland and Old Stage, it seems to be pretty jarring. And just down at the other end of Woodland, as we just discussed, there's already some commercial.
Okay. So we'll go back and look at the parcel layer and kind of see what, somewhere there between Woodland and Vandora Springs. How about that?
Yeah, I would say just, closer to Vandora than Woodland, but
Further south, the better. Alrighty, number 4. So up here we recently had the tax credit apartment project at Creech and Tryon Road. There are a couple of parcels tucked in right here that we think would be large enough to support some neighborhood services there. So we proposed again a neighborhood activity center kind of on that, what we would call the southwest quadrant of Tryon and Creech. It would be hemmed in by the creek and Tryon Road in the apartment complex. We do have a number of projects over here that Habitat has under contract that would build out quite a bit of residential on the east side of Creech Road. So again, this would be one, too, that we would want to look at least coding those parcels right here to a level 3. And take these out of the blue and put them into the purple for non-residential. Thoughts on that one?
Trying to find that on the maps here. I'm not looking at the right area, I don't believe, on Creech Road, but
right at the bend.
Right before you get to the big bend.
on the east or west?
On the west.
Okay.
I think for me, that makes a certain amount of sense. I go back to the idea that there's a fair amount of vacant land around there, so putting in something even small-scale commercial isn't as jarring if it's going into a very well-developed residential, whatever that scale may be. And the new projects that are going in are probably more scale appropriate to commercial versus but we just, I know there is some, single family ranch, it looks like, in the Gatewood, but.
I think here our biggest concern was trying to give that part of Garner some kind of focus.
There's really nothing there.
Because there's not a lot of good opportunities elsewhere, we feel, in the corridor. Eventually, you'll also have Wilmington Road coming into that area. So between those three roads between Wilmington, Creech, and Tryon. Again, not a community level or a regional level activity center. We're just talking neighborhood.
I mean, even up the street on Creech, I think as you get into Raleigh, there is that gas station or convenience store. Or,
There is right there on the corner of Sanderford and Creech.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's still Garner or Raleigh, but
So this is also where Tryon is eventually going to connect
Yes,
through to Creech.
Tryon would be coming right through here, north of Cloverdale, and right through here, and then up here.
that
So all those streets would be kind of 3-lane, 2-lane divided.
And
Kind of
there's that
major
new development
collectors.
there At that end.
Yeah, we have-
New houses.
we approved that or recommended for approval of that project, didn't we?
That's pretty much. That makes sense. I mean, it would enhance the kind of small commercial existence that is already there. The convenience store.
Right.
It could enhance that. I mean, there's already a good amount of activity there. People access that.
Downtown isn't far away, but again, from a walk shed perspective and an equity perspective for folks that live in that area, it does tend to be probably lower income families right now. I feel it would be important to, again, have some kind of service node.
There really isn't anything else there besides that little convenience store. You kind of have to go either further down. I've lost my
At the Rock Quarry
Rock
or
Quarry. It was so close on my tongue.
Alrighty. You can come back to any of these that you want if something pops into your head. Number 5 would be to add a neighborhood activity center at the northeast intersection of Guy Road and East Garner. So that is actually in the blue hatched area right here. Again, there's not anything really neighborhood focused out in this area. It's mostly because you've got 540 coming through. You've got US 70. It tends to be more community oriented, high traffic oriented. But there is some land available right in this area, again on the northeast side, that we think there again, from a kind of an equity perspective and a different type of activity center, something that would be more appropriate for some of these other residential developments like Gatsby Station that we just approved, which is right here. And then there's some existing county subdivisions here, but then there's also the possibility for some additional residential. And it's also on the north side of the railroad tracks, so you don't have to be dealing with that as well. So again, neighborhood focused. Again, proposal would be to go from a level 2 to a level 3. You can kind of see with the roads that are there, it's kind of right in this pocket right here. And then also changing this from the light blue to the purple. Yeah, and keeping in mind, I don't mean to skip over the typology map, but we're not proposing a change to that. But again, still predominantly neighborhood, so that the neighborhood typology gives it an even lower kind of scale and intensity.
makes sense to me. Anybody else?
I don't have a problem with it.
I like the area, it's just that's a bad alignment intersection there, terrible. And I think as part of any planning, there's gonna have to be some realignment there
Oh yeah.
of Guy Road in particular.
Yeah, and I think kind of to play with that too, the more we kind of have as a non-residential, I think those kinds of realignments, actually the feasibility goes up. Because you have more, tend to have slightly more expensive developments, then that can help to fund some of that work. Okay, number 6, just a standalone here to the framework map would be to add a neighborhood activity center at the northwest of the intersection of Auburn, Knightdale, and Rock Quarry. So we made some adjustments to this area before, but we kind of, again, pulled some of these community-style activity centers close here to 540. So again, we don't want to neglect that corner, which is right next to Burnett Farms. So again, putting a neighborhood activity center there on that side to kind of reinforce some different types of non-residential opportunities, and again, something that folks from the larger Auburn area can gravitate to without having to cross any major roads and intersections.
Has there been anything that's come up at the, I guess it'd be the southwest intersection adjacent to that development that we had?
Not as of yet. I think that's a future phase. That's all in their assemblage. Yep.
I mean, I think that intersection would be a great spot, but we don't know what they might do across the road, so they might possibly incorporate something as well.
Alrighty. Number 7, this one we actually looked at potentially a community activity center. Southwest quadrant of 540 with White Oak Road, so that's right here. This one does have some infrastructure challenges, but there is an assemblage that's just sandwiched right in there. They're large parcels. You know, if it were to go residential at some point, it would probably be something that doesn't mind being right next to the interstate and an interchange. But it just seems like, again, we're kind of in a little bit of a void. But being that close and in that location, it seemed like a community activity center would be appropriate. And to potentially go from a level 2 to either a 3 or a 4. Would like to get some input from you on that specific question. And then again, also going from blue to purple from a tier 3 residential to a tier 3 non-residential. Thoughts on that one? Gina, that's kind of in your neck of the woods.
Waiting for others to see if they want to speak. See if others want to speak before I speak up.
What do you envision as a community activity possible there?
So when I look at some of the others that we have identified, you know, the Food Lion Shopping Center at McCullers and some of the stuff across the street tend to fit that, although that's Costco almost kind of wants to take that into a more of a regional kind of perspective, but it's still I think it's still suitable for being community. The Garnertown Square is a community, designated as a community, so something that's probably grocery store-ish anchored, some larger retail.
So Jeff, I do have a comment, I think.
Okay.
So when we look at what would fit the character of the space? Are we looking at what's existing versus what's missing? Because in that particular area, right here on White Oak Road, we don't have a grocery store anywhere nearby. We've got Target, that's Super Target, that does sell some groceries, but it's not a grocery store. We have to go either over to 50 in Timber Drive or either down to 42. And so, like, something like a grocery store would be very fitting, you know, for that area, because it would give the neighborhood something that is missing.
So I think as staff, we've looked at it through both lenses, both what's missing, but then also then how do we be sensitive to what is there. And in some cases, like this, you know, there's not really anything in this quadrant. There is some development on the other side of White Oak, but it's very sporadic. So I think it gives you more of an opportunity to invite more change if you want to, because you're not impacting much else. So that's why we were hesitant. We didn't know if we should code that as a 3 or a 4A potentially, which would be the light pink. And that means that you could go a little bit taller if you got the mixed use component.
I mean, you know, for me, if it wasn't for 540, I would say it's on the lower tier of that. But with 540, that's going to be, you know, transformative. So to me, going a little bit, a little bigger, a little denser, kind of makes some sense. Especially because there's really not much there now. And yeah, 540 is going to kind of change the game.
Yeah, and I think 4A can again still be lower. Instead of from 1 to 3 stories, you can have from 1 to 5 stories. So you can, it doesn't have to be, but it would allow for something to go a little bit taller.
One of the things that Matt has shown here is some really artistic examples of not clear cutting to make a Garner station, but perhaps more along the lines of a Highwoods, where you have a lot of trees, you have a lot of buildings that are kind of hidden in amongst them, and keep it greener, keep it walkable for the people that work there. This just cutting everything down and putting a few trees in an island isn't the idea of beauty, and that's not what we're really talking about. But I think that location with 540 and looking 10, 15 years down the road is probably a prime spot to perhaps envision something more upscale that serves that area. Because you look at what 540 has done to other areas in the last 15 years, you know, it's basically a rural area, and all of a sudden it has exploded for miles around it. And you're going to see the same thing down here in a very short time, just with the number of people that are moving to the area.
I'd agree.
So I like that. I like that location.
All right. We're going to get out of the maps here pretty soon for some other things, but I got 3 more here. Number 8, these are more just to be reflective of what's currently happening and to reinforce that. So we've had a bunch of, you know, regional centers right here around the 70-40 interchange, and we've pushed them around. In so doing, though, I think we probably should go back and put an employment one here on Greenfield North. There are still a couple of parcels in that area that have not developed. So again, we've got the employment by White Oak Business Park and Greenfield South, but it probably doesn't hurt to also put one here on Greenfield North. So that's number 8. And then number 9, and Matt, let me know if you think differently on this one, because this was another one that we've played with. Again, staff was thinking of pushing the retail regional center back up to the existing White Oak Shopping Center. Again, just to kind of continue to reinforce that as our regional retail destination. but then putting a community activity center down here where the R is, the regional is currently. So again, giving some credence there to something that's a little more scaled down, or I guess I say scaled down in terms of like car traffic, but potentially up in terms of walkability, to do something a little bit different here, because we do have a number of large parcels there, where I think, again, you're going to, and if the interchange at 40 ever comes to fruition, I think that would also help.
Where exactly is that?
So Timber Drive kind of turns and comes down through here, and so you've got the apartment complexes right in here. And then this would be a future Timber Drive coming back down into White Oak near, I forget the name of those
Hebron
streets.
Church? Is that at Hebron Church and
Just to the east of Hebron Church, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so just a little bit past, a little closer to the interstate. Yeah. So again, 8 and 9 would put, suggestions would put the regional retail back up here and the community activity center down here.
Where's the Wake Med Hospital going?
That is right here where this
Okay.
regional employment
Okay.
is. Yep, good question.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to make sense to me. I think that, maybe even the argument is that regional activity center that's shown is maybe a little intensive for that location and should be scaled back a step.
Yeah, I think that, the existing White Oak area is not very pedestrian friendly at all. So, if that, unless that's kind of really redesigned, I know we talked about that in our clue
Which
conversations.
someday you never know.
Right, who knows, that there's more of a green way and walking paths and connects things back and forth. So I do think there's something that helps to pull some of that traffic into a smaller walkable area for the neighborhood that's around it. It could help. I don't know what you think.
I think not only is it not pedestrian friendly, it's not vehicle friendly either.
That is true.
Ditto.
I think one of the big questions is what is going to be proposed for the new Wake Med. How that's going to tie in to traffic, to the existing roadways. You've got potentially thousands of employees that'll be working there. You can walk across the street and then it kind of stops, unless you're going to one of two restaurants. And then after that, there's no more sidewalks in there. And I think that that whole area that's going to be developed needs to be envisioned with that pedestrian-friendly walkability in mind.
Absolutely. Alrighty. Number 10, last on the map here, would be to change, oh no, I'm sorry, that was 9 and 10 together.
Yep.
My bad. I had 8 and 9 together, but I meant 9 and 10. My apologies. All right, so now, so that kind of completes staff's comments on that. Again, we do feel that this is the critical piece, because this is what's going to help us get folks to be thinking about bringing those mixed-use components to play. So kind of the more we spread that around, the more we can talk about it. Let's see. Let me go to page 41. This was kind of a clerical edit, but it was enough that I wanted to bring it to everybody's attention. We've simplified the orange category to just read neighborhoods everywhere else in the document. So we would propose actually just striking the word residential and just making it neighborhoods to be consistent. But then also adding some language in here. Let me increase the size of this so we can actually read it. Oh, it's not going to let me do that. So something similar to what's in the rural living category, where it addresses that you can have, you know, kind of a one-off commercial here and there. So we would propose then adding to the end of this parenthetical description and formal supporting commercial nodes. So rather than informal, ask for it to be something that's formal, something that's planned and integrated with the neighborhood, but again, something that doesn't allow for something that doesn't rise to the level of making it an activity center, but it could be a daycare, it could be a small retail place, there could be a co-working you know, location, office, whatever the case may be, but something that that immediate neighborhood can use. So I don't think we want to, we used to have the zoning district's neighborhood office and neighborhood commercial. Those have now gone away, but we do have that neighborhood mixed use zoning district. And that does include, you know, that was envisioned to kind of take in those categories, but it still keeps the focus on the residential, but it does allow you to have those one or two buildings, you know, in a neighborhood that are integrated with it, well thought out, truly support the neighborhood that's adjacent to it. I don't think we want to limit that. We've actually been talking with several residential developers here as of late, where we're trying to encourage them very strongly to do that, to consider what they can bring, whether it is as simple as a daycare or a co-working space, something along those lines.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely necessary. But it goes back to the conversation we had earlier about how do you encourage developers to assemble multiple parcels so that they have the space to do something like that. I think of, was it Bedford Falls up in North Raleigh? There's, I can't remember the neighborhood, but in Apex around where Southern Peak Brewery is, that's kind of a little bit of a commercial, but it's built around, or residential is built all around it and becomes a community rather than just a housing development. So I think anything we can do to promote that where it makes sense is fantastic.
How do we then recharacterize neighborhood to also recognize that means residential as well?
Oh,
Right, I know it's listed,
yeah.
but you know, when we take residential out of the residential neighborhood kind of labeling, does it remove the context somehow? Does that make sense? Like the overall, like we see this as a residential neighborhood, then all of a sudden it's not residential, just a neighborhood. Even though it has designation underneath it that describes it, would that come into a character question when perhaps an owner or developer comes in and wants to develop it, and it says, well, it's not a residential neighborhood, it's a neighborhood that can have commercial. Like, would that be a question, is all I'm saying.
Right, it's a good question. And I think what I would point you to here is when we were going through the document, we were reading through here the more detailed description of neighborhoods on page 48. And everything here is about residential until you get to this little paragraph in one sentence, 2 sentences at the end that says, neighborhoods are primarily residential in nature, but may include limited civic or ancillary non-residential uses. And again, the choice of the word ancillary there was chosen because ancillary implies that it's supportive. It's not independent of and functioning separately. Yeah, Matt was saying that's how you you insist on pedestrian connections from within the neighborhood and things like that. That makes sense.
Oh, just on a consistency basis, the map has residential neighborhood, orange coloring, yet the total description in orange is neighborhoods.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and to a certain degree, residential and neighborhoods are somewhat overlapping terms, so I don't have a problem with removing the residential from the legend.
Yeah, we really, like I say, with the emphasis on trying to incorporate the mix of uses and not to take anything away from the residential or to say that we're not going to protect the residential. You know, if you think about a lot of good neighborhoods, they include stuff that's not just residential. Not a lot. Okay. And so, and I mentioned this, I believe, as I was talking, but just to go here to page 70, then one of the things that we would propose is that this little neighborhood commercial building type be allowed in that neighborhood category, because otherwise the only thing we have is a church or a school type building. So we would add a box there. And so that would all kind of work together again to inform the scale and the type. And
That makes sense.
all right, everybody doing okay? All right. Oh, we're only an hour and 20 minutes in. I was worried it was worse than that. But we don't have far to go. Page 57. So this again is the character area crosswalk, and this is the one that kind of establishes the link between the land uses that we have in this document and the zoning districts that we have in the UDO. Not just our UDO, but also within the county zoning ordinance. So a few things that we wanted to suggest here. Add a box for neighborhood mixed use zoning, again, under the neighborhoods column. So that, again, we can have that little one-off if the zoning doesn't allow for and that's potentially something that we could tweak in the UDO going forward, but I think at the very least, again, that neighborhood mixed use district was designed to bring in the neighborhood commercial and the old neighborhood office, and that's exactly what we used those for. So we would want to be able to continue to recommend that. And then number 13 would be to add a box for manufactured home park zoning district under the rural living category. And this, we have a couple different ways that we deal with manufactured homes in the ordinance. We do have the standalone base district, which is specifically for parks. And then we have the overlay where manufactured homes can be done on individual lots. So I don't think that we would be opposed to having manufactured home parks in a rural setting. Many of them already are. So not just in neighborhoods where that might actually be more of the overlay, but the RMH in the rural. And then let's see. Also under the rural living concept, or that line item, column, sorry, the highway district in the county zoning ordinance. This one is, the county's highway district is unique, is the best word I can come up with. If you think about traveling down a country road and you happen to cross by a auto repair place that suddenly is just out there in the middle of nowhere, or you know, the little country store, anything like that. You could even have like junkyards and things like that. They use that district in a very rural setting sometimes to allow for that kind of flexibility as things are transitioning potentially from rural. Like they identify those as wanting to be something else that's usually non-residential or not rural, but for the foreseeable future, it's probably going to remain that and still have these one-offs. So that was just a recommendation from staff, knowing a little bit more about how that district is geared and how the county uses it. We probably should keep that zoning district within that rural living category. Let's see, and then under the mixed use centers column, adding a box for light industrial, which would be the third row down. With adding that district, we feel it would be appropriate because it would support the inclusion of, and if you go to the description of mixed use centers, the longer one, which I'm probably going the wrong way, right here. It talks about that mixed-use centers support the inclusion of research and development campus, manufacturing center, or other centers of excellence. So if we don't include an industrial zoning district, we're not going to capture that. Again, there might be some tweaks we want to make to that, but staff feels that at this point, if we just recommend the light industrial, that's stuff that all happens indoors. It's not any kind of outdoor manufacturing, that would directly correlate with the research and development and indoor manufacturing. So hopefully those are pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I think with that one, you just may need to think about the specific language, whether it's in the UDO or just to make sure it's maybe a little tighter than what we already have, just to make sure that we're getting, making it what you want and you don't end up with some unintended consequence.
Right. Yeah, so I think we can still, again, that's where we can use the comp plan in the meantime. If somebody wants to propose a light industrial, if that light industrial, because we're going to more than likely require them to go through the conditional process where they have to limit what uses they're actually going to commit to. And we can use this in the comp plan to help them tailor that and rule out the other uses.
Sense.
So we're down to the last two that we had as staff. So page 71 here, again, we're back at the building typology crosswalk. Adding boxes for stacked mixed-use buildings on the retail centers line and the employment centers line. So the red and the blue, this stacked mixed-use building, so that it would kind of work both ways, where if the emphasis needed to be on the retail, you might be able to have some office above it, so not residential, but something that's not retail oriented, and vice versa. In the employment centers, you could have a little coffee shop, sandwich shop as well, that are kind of more suited for that stacked mixed use type building. This was the biggest one that I had kind of a question mark for Matt, just to make sure that I was reading all of these pieces together correctly. Does that make sense?
No, I wouldn't put it in neighborhood.
Right.
So I think because neighborhood would look more like the hip roof.
Yes.
Character. Yeah, I think we're good.
Again, trying to make some of these districts a little more self-supportive. So if you do have a large employment area and you can support a sandwich shop or something like that, why not? Okay. And then finally, on page 232, fortunately, most of the rest that intervenes here between the 70s and the 200s is textual, so we've been over a lot of that in past reviews. But again, our only comment here was potentially to move this particular node for a future Town of Garner program park potentially a little bit further to the south to fit where there is a little more opportunity for that to take place with the assemblage that's left.
Makes sense. Definitely want to capture opportunity.
All right. Well, that's the end of our second bucket. Like Matt said, there is a third bucket, which is mostly just clerical stuff. So stuff that doesn't really rise to the need of just correcting things. Do you all have any other comments? And then I would just say we got a few members of the public here if they would like to make any comments as well.
Absolutely. All right. Appreciate it, Matt and Jeff. Great presentation. We do have a few folks in the audience who I know would like to make a comment. So as you step to the podium, please state your name and address for the record. Please try to keep comments to the 5-minute mark. I'm not going to hold you to that to the second, but if we can try to keep within that to respect everyone's time. And thank you.
Well, good evening. I applaud your patience in what you've just been through. I'm Jeff Swain. I live at 263 Shady Hollow Lane in Garner, and have been there now, can't believe it, but almost 14 years, and served on the Planning Commission when we went through this very process, I think about 5 years ago this month, or whenever that was. It was about 5 years ago for Garner Forward first version. So I just want to make a couple of remarks about my role with the Garner Economic Development Corporation. These are not remarks that were voted on by the board, but I think they're general enough to keep me out of trouble, and also a couple of other personal notes. I had submitted comments in March on the draft, and then again at the May 16th public hearing. I submitted comments in writing since I was out of town. And I want to first say that this is a very courageous plan with much in it, and probably my comments are going to come back from some of the, I call it more granular topics that you've just been dealing with, but nevertheless they're very important from more of a higher level point of view. First off, in the vision statement, between the draft that I commented on in March and the plan that I commented in May, in the vision statement, and I don't know why this was removed, but there was a statement in the draft that said, ultimately the plan's relevance will be measured by its implementation. That phrase was taken out of the vision statement, and I thought it was a powerful remark about implementation. But nevertheless, it was removed in the final, and I don't know why, and so if anyone can amplify that, then perhaps Matt can do that. But otherwise, as I say, I thought the vision statement was bold, powerful message that gives residents confidence about their town's future. Now, first, from the GEDC point of view, Garner Economic Development Corporation, we are very interested in the Northeast Gateway project that's been defined in the plan. And of course, GEDC entered into a land swap with the town, and we have some real estate interests in the Northeast Gateway, and we're going to be pursuing a feasibility study for that area up there adjacent to 40 and Jones Sausage. Also, very interested in site number 5, which is at down by the Interstate 540 and NC 50 as a potential development area that I think the town has some interest in. And of course, this is where we get back to the extraterritorial jurisdictions. And I guess they're still on the books, and so I would stick to the recommendation with all due urgency. Even while the legislature's messing around with current extraterritorial jurisdiction language, why not file the request and go to Wake County Commissioners and get it approved? I know that the extension of this ETJ to the south, as it's recommended in the plan, was first discussed by town council about 1.5 years ago. I think now there's enough justification to have a plan to take it to the county as soon as possible. And I would say, too, that in the long run, in terms of some of the economic development objectives that we've discussed at GEDC, extension of the ETJ is vital to the long-term economic development for the town of Garner. So it's a very vital piece of the puzzle, if you will. So a couple of other comments of a general nature on the growth framework and framework map. There's a quote in there that caught my attention, that town leaders should resist future land use map changes as zoning map amendments requests for low-density, single-use, unconnected development for any of the regional employment activity centers identified in the framework. And so this is basically the point about let's be very careful about what zoning changes are approved in the face of looking for future development sites for commercial, industrial, employment. And you'll note in the implementation matrix, one of the recommendations is on an annual basis to create 100 new well-paying jobs in the town. So we need to keep that in mind. The user's guide for the document. It calls for a call to action for stakeholders in the town's future. And people should be encouraged to read the entire document to fully understand the town's philosophy and position on future growth. And so in my view, the town council and the town administration should develop new approaches for encouraging residents to become involved in helping shape the town's future. I don't know how many comments there were at the public hearing or how many have come across the threshold here in Town Hall. But I would suggest that there needs to be more aggressive outreach work with the various neighborhoods in the town itself. And so far as neighborhoods are concerned, I'll come back to something that Matt discussed, but there's a recommendation about preparing public realm master plans for specific neighborhoods. This has always been, since I've been here, something, while not seeing the light of day necessarily or really being discussed, Garner's a very diverse community, not just in its population and demographics, but also in its different neighborhoods and in terms of the years of development and the types of housing and so forth. And I think that the town really ought to look at a more of a neighborhood identification plan, if you will, and then go forward with this idea. While I don't fully understand what a public realm master plan is, it's the first time I've read it, but it sounded from the details like a good idea. So you get neighborhood plans. I mean, in my experience, in planning and development work, the focus really was on individual neighborhoods. And I think that really is something that ought to be taken a hard look at. Now, implementation. There is an implementation matrix available. I hope you all have read all 66 of the recommendations. I'm being facetious about that, but the plan simply says the matrix is available if you contact the planning office. Of those 66 recommendations, 60 of them are called out for action from between 0 and 5 years. In my estimation, there should be some work commenced as soon as this plan is adopted for breaking down those recommendations and really putting some time frames to them. Because honestly, the experience, and Jeff can vouch for this, with our 2018 Garner Forward plan, Jeff struggled in some cases to put together an annual report on it. And if you looked, I'm not sure we did a good job in implementing some of those recommendations, or scratch them if they are not feasible. And so I guess for me, as a resident of the town, when I see an implementation matrix, should I believe that the administration and town council and you folks all support those 66? Or should they really be dissected at some point and begin to plan them out over time in a more precise way? Because, of course, a number of them depend on town budget, which is not necessarily in terms of revenues in the best of shape. But the implementation section calls for a community report card, and I think Matt made reference to that earlier. That becomes then the basis, or in advance of that, part of a monitoring process so that we can track what it is that's being accomplished from those particular recommendations. Enough said about that. You read the text yourself. It's a very exciting document, the plan behind it, the work you folks have done tonight, very impressive. We just have to make it happen and hope that we all together will do that and pay attention to it happening. Now, one other subject, which is the affordable housing subject, which I commented on going back 5-6 years, a very difficult topic to tackle for a number of reasons. I do applaud the town for having gone ahead with the low-income tax credit project, in which the town is investing $500,000. You folks approved the zoning. I read your comments when you did approve the zoning, and I know it was not an easy vote to take, given the number of units, the way it was structured with a yet-to-be-built Tryon Road running through the center of the development. So we all are going to need to really keep track of how that project evolves going forward. My view on affordable housing really starts at the grassroots with a neighborhood improvement program that the town once had but eliminated 5 years ago. I'm hoping they will reinstitute it. But essentially, we have naturally occurring affordable housing in a lot of our older housing stock, much of which is owner-occupied. And there are programs available, of course require funding, to assist homeowners or to communicate with and work with investors who may own some of these properties. But the fact is, it isn't only about constructing new affordable housing, but it is to protect what we have in Garner. And what we have in Garner is one of the major reasons that my wife and I chose to live in Garner, and that is the diversity of the community, both economically, racially, culturally. And so take a hard look at, as we go forward, at what I call anyway, and I think it's a term of art, but naturally occurring affordable housing with homeowners or investors who may need, if they qualify financially, to get some financial assistance. I would also add that I sat in on a meeting of the Wake County Affordable Housing Advisory Group. They had a presentation from a planner from Morrisville. And if anybody is interested in pursuing, some ideas for local community in like Morrisville, like Garner, in affordable housing, should see some of the ideas that those folks in Morrisville have come up with. Now, of course, they need some money to implement the ideas. But nevertheless, there's a lot that can be done in our current neighborhoods to protect them and to maintain what I think of as affordable housing. Amen. Thank you.
right, thank you, Mr. Swain. Is there anyone else who would like to speak from the public? All right, seeing none, we appreciate everything. We appreciate all the comments, all the hard work that's gone into this plan, the commission's time on the steering committee, Matt's time drafting it, Jeff's time reviewing and organizing. Appreciate all the, that it's not just us who are reviewing this, but also our community as well. So I do believe Mr. Swain brought up some really great points, and I think we should take those to heart as we work towards finalizing this document and hopefully adopting it in the next couple months. And I think, implementation is always a big factor, and the plan is no good if we can't implement it. So I think as we as a commission move forward and looking at projects that come across the desk and cases in front of us, that we try to really think hard about this work that went into it, and that we set ourselves up for success and actual implementation. So since we're not voting on adopting this tonight or recommending adoption, I think it's thank you. So I'll leave it if there's any further comments. If not, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda. Hearing no other comments, let's move on to the planning director's report.
In terms of cases that have gone through from y'all to the town council, the Guy Road US 70 commercial project, we did get your there were questions about the trash enclosure and the sidewalk connectivity and all of that. We got those things corrected or clarified, and had those presented to the council, and they did approve that project unanimously. The Swift Creek Apartments is probably going to be, or will be going back to them at their next meeting. So that one, they had a little more time to respond to your comments with the plan and their conditions. So that one is moving forward. Other than that, at your July meeting, the only thing on the agenda right now would be the recommendation on this plan. There may be something else. I'm not quite yet sure of that. And we are conducting interviews for the various positions that we have open, and hopefully by the next meeting I should have some updates for you on personnel hires within our department.
Sounds good. For the Swift Creek Apartments, would it be possible for you or Ashley to send out the plan just for our reference? I'm curious to see what changes they made, and not that we'll have any say on it, but just out of curiosity. Great, thank you. All right. Any opportunity for the commission to ask questions, make comments?
I don't have anything.
I will make my plea one more time. Next month is our election of officers.
Election of officers, yes.
As I said, I would be happy cycling off as chair, but if no one else is wanting to step up, I will continue on. Either way, so just let your intentions be known if you have intentions. With that, I thank everybody, Mr.
And council did make an appointment for Vang's position. Ms. Jahan Hodges, she lives off of Buffalo Road, will be joining you at your meeting in July as the new ETJ representative.
All right, sounds great. Thank you for your service, Vang. All right, with that, I will adjourn.